I'm introducing a person who needs no introduction, so I'm not going to introduce David Knoll. But I am, first let me say, it is a shame that our co-president, Brian Samuels, is not here today, but I'm going to make a very fun announcement that Brian and Jenny's daughter, Fiona, just gave birth to a healthy baby daughter this morning, so we wish them all the best and good health. So it's great for their family to have such a simcha in a difficult time. So, as was quickly said by Dorothy, Judy Hall and I have been involved with this relational Judaism, and we've actually been inspired by David. So I turn the floor over to David, who's going to inspire you all with the next stages of how we're developing this one relationship at a time. Thank you.
It says, with a little help from my friends, so we're going to go to the man who started this whole process.
How do you explain when things don't go as we assume? Or better, how do you explain when others are able to achieve things that seem to defy all of the assumptions? For example, why is Apple so innovative? Year after year after year after year, they're more innovative than all their competition. And yet, they're just a computer company. They're just like everyone else. They have the same access to the same talent, the same agencies, the same consultants, the same media. Then why is it that they seem to have something different? Why is it that Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement? He wasn't the only man who suffered in a pre-civil rights America, and he certainly wasn't the only great orator of the day. Why him? And why is it that the Wright brothers were able to figure out controlled powered manned flight when there were certainly other teams who were better qualified, better funded, and they didn't achieve powered manned flight, and the Wright brothers beat them to it? There's something else at play here. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done, that's how most sales is done, and that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do, we say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You're ready to buy a computer from me. All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This explains why every single person in this room is perfectly comfortable buying a computer from Apple. But we're also perfectly comfortable buying an MP3 player from Apple, or a phone from Apple, or a DVR from Apple. But as I said before, Apple's just a computer company. There's nothing that distinguishes them structurally from any of their competitors. Their competitors are all equally qualified to make all of these products. In fact, they tried. A few years ago, Gateway came out with flat screen TVs. They're eminently qualified to make flat screen TVs. They've been making flat screen monitors for years. Nobody bought one. But if you don't know why you do what you do, and people respond to why you do what you do, then how will you ever get people to vote for you or buy something from you, or more importantly, be loyal and want to be a part of what it is that you do? Again, the goal is not just to sell people who need what you have. The goal is to sell to people who believe what you believe. The goal is not just to hire people who need a job. It's to hire people who believe what you believe. I always say that, there's if you hire people just because they can do a job, they'll work for your money. But if you hire people who believe what you believe, they work for you with blood and sweat and tears. And nowhere else is there a better example of this than with the Wright brothers. Most people don't know about Samuel Pierpont Langley. And back in the early 20th century, the pursuit of powered man flight was like the dot-com of the day. Everybody was trying it. And Samuel Pierpont Langley had what we assume to be the recipe for success. I mean, even now you ask people, why did your product or why did your company fail? And people always give you the same permutation of the same three things. Undercapitalized, the wrong people, bad market conditions. It's always the same three things. So let's explore that. Samuel Pierpont Langley was given $50,000 by the War Department to figure out this flying machine. Money was no problem. He held a seat at Harvard and worked at the Smithsonian and was extremely well connected. He knew all the big minds of the day. He hired the best minds money could find, and the market conditions were fantastic. The New York Times followed him around everywhere, and everyone was rooting for Langley. And how come we've never heard of Samuel Pierpont Langley? A few hundred miles away in Dayton, Ohio, Orville and Wilbur Wright. They had none of what we consider to be the recipe for success. They had no money. They paid for their dream with the proceeds from their bicycle shop. Not a single person on the Wright brothers' team had a college education, not even Orville or Wilbur. And the New York Times followed them around nowhere. The difference was Orville and Wilbur were driven by a cause, by a purpose, by a belief. They believed that if they could figure out this flying machine, it'll change the course of the world. Samuel Pierpont Langley was different. He wanted to be rich, and he wanted to be famous. He was in pursuit of the result. He was in pursuit of the riches. And lo and behold, look what happened. The people who believed in the Wright brothers' dream worked with them with blood and sweat and tears. The others just worked for the paycheck. And they tell stories of how every time the Wright brothers went out, they would have to take 5 sets of parts because that's how many times they would crash before they came in for supper. And eventually, on December 17th, 1903, the Wright brothers took flight.
So how will we take flight? First of all, you've got to think Jewish and not in silos. That's why the UPJ is building a culture of collaboration. We all face the same challenges that are on the board. But the central message is you're not alone. We need a bigger strategy. So let's go from Apple to living Judaism. We know what we currently do, and we know how we do what we do. Every one of our congregations and schools can answer that question. And we are still asking ourselves why things don't go the way we wish they would. But can each of us articulate why we do what we do? Do we know what our members and our potential members find inspirational? And I've put inspirational in yellow for a reason, and I didn't even know that the previous panel would land on that proposition. Does Apple sell computers like Dell or HP? Do we sell worship services? We don't. But that's what so many of the congregations that I visit and talk with talk about. We actually believe in a living Judaism that challenges the status quo, that challenges us to think differently, that is relevant to the way we live our 21st century lives. Does that sound like what you just heard? Want to join us? Think about why we have a Jewish community. The truth is, most congregations start with their what and move to the how, just as in the example of Dell Computers, and neglect to think about the why. What we need to know, and we need to be able to articulate, is why we do what we do. And my next slide is a pinch from Rabbi Elise Goldstein, with whom I had the pleasure of studying a long time ago. And she called it the progressive inferiority complex. Many of us carry something inside that says, it's better to be orthodox or maybe even conservative. I'll reframe that question. Do you want to belong to a movement that is unambiguous about granting equality to all Jews, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identification? Some movements insist that their women are equal on the other side of a curtain. Some tolerate their LGBTQI members and treat them with compassion. In Sydney, we have an Orthodox synagogue where the treasurer was a gay man and they would not give a joint aliyah to him and his husband. He moved on. Why did I choose my shul? And I get asked that question, interestingly, on one occasion in an Orthodox shul where they challenged me to lead Musaf, and I did, and they were amazed. I chose my shul because I stand for 100% of the Jewish people, not 50. So to see how to articulate why, may I put in a second plug for the session that Rabbi Kim and Josh Keller have put together, which is the first launch of talking about our Judaism. Who do we need to talk with? Not to, with. Let me move to the demographics. That's Gen 17. This is how people articulate, without any pressure from anyone else, on a deep survey, what they see as their Judaism. What it tells you is that, and I'll come to the stat in a minute, 55%, a majority of Australian Jews, and we cross-checked this with a smaller survey in New Zealand, it's identical, explicitly say they are not Orthodox. That is, they self-identify as Jewish but not Orthodox. We reach 13% of Australian and New Zealand Jews. What does that tell us? It tells us that we have to have a conversation. Because being actively Jewish is no longer a given for Jews in open societies. Our market is the 55% of Australian Jews who identify as very much Jewish but not Orthodox. That 42% we don't reach yet, and they call themselves either traditional or just Jewish. Gen 17 also found that half of Australian Jewry reject sectarian labels. So can we resonate with those Jews who describe themselves as either traditional or just Jewish? We know that they are drifting away from orthodoxy, but have not yet been attracted to our communities. And we also know, because we've done some study of it, that they have no sense of why and how we uphold Jewish traditions. Nor do they know that our Jewish values resonate with the way they live their lives as 21st century Jews. But they're scared of sectarian labels. What are they attracted to? Something that is authentic and inclusive. Those are the labels routinely used. Well, we can build relationships with them because our Judaism is authentic and inclusive. It's a Judaism in which Jews will want to participate. That is something we believe. Will they really? Well, only if we start actively listening. And that's not about doing a survey or a quick chat. Two big issues stood out as the no-nos in Gen 17, and you need to know what they are. They wanted Jewish day school fee assistance. It is a sad reality that going to day school in Melbourne or Perth costs 20% more than in Sydney because we have a JCA in Sydney. But in any city, it is just too expensive. And they wanted, wait for it, reduce religious divisions between Jews. That's 42% of Australian Jews rated that as their second top, and only by 1%, thing they wanted changed in Australian Jewry. So we have the challenge of presenting ourselves as mainstream, open to all, and not defining ourselves as something we're not. So it really matters. Most importantly, there is a person, I've changed the name, and some people have heard me tell this story, but it is really valuable, who is a young mother who was active in her small progressive congregation and asked why she doesn't try to attract her friends. Her answer was that most of her friends are nominally modern Orthodox or secular. She wasn't confident in espousing her own values, let alone attracting her friends to progressive Judaism. So what can we do to empower Sarah to speak with her peers? What excites her about being Jewish and about progressive Jewish values? Do we ask, what is something you love to do? Why is that important to you? How can you take that to build a 21st century Jewish community? Well, what's special about those questions? What's different about each of those questions? They focus on what matters to you, Sarah, not what matters to us, the synagogue board. Really listening is hard, but it is essential. When we really listen, we will discover patterns of connection that we haven't anticipated. And that's the discovery that relational Judaism provides. Patterns of connection for Jewish people are sometimes similar and sometimes they differ. What patterns we learn, we have to utilise. And listening is really hard. Programmed listening is even harder. And careful management of the data that we acquire is even harder still. But doing so is the way forward. And not emphasising the labels, the P word, the M word, the C word. It can be challenging, but if you're going to open up the conversation, you can add the labels later. Because our Judaism is a Judaism that I firmly believe 55% of Australian and New Zealand Jews want to be part of. How do we make it work? Time for tachlis. I hope I've got your agreement that it's worth making it work. Okay, so how do we go about it? Have a plan. Combine your skills of relational Judaism. If you want to learn more, we're happy to help you. That's one of the collaborative functions of the UPJ. Take the Talking About Judaism course, which will be launched today, into your community. Sometimes it's the board. Sometimes it's your neshama people, the people with real soul who aren't on the board but who are there and very committed. Train them in the skills of relational Judaism. They can meet monthly and map out who will engage in relational Judaism with which of their members, and gradually fan out to potential members. And when they meet, they report back what has been learned, and that gets recorded. And as you proceed, within a matter of a few months, you will discover patterns of connection, patterns of what inspires people in their Jewish lives. One of my classic questions, which I learnt from Judy Hall, who's here, is tell me something in your earlier life that inspired you about being Jewish. You would be amazed the stories you get from people. And when people start telling you their stories and you can share yours, you've got a relationship you can build on. So with those patterns of what connects, what inspires, what makes Judaism relevant to people, you'll discover patterns of connection. And you can make that part of a committed strategy. It's by talking to friends that relational Judaism helps synagogues grow. People who are inspired by what you do will tell their friends. And if you want to learn how to really make it grow, I have a wonderful little package called Great Coffee Dates, and it doesn't always involve Snoopy. Sometimes your first coffee date could be fleeting. It might even be a social media connection. It could be just a phone call. It could be someone who comes to a social justice activity. Just have the chat. Make a time to go and have coffee with them. It shouldn't be at a Jewish institutional address. And engage in that relational conversation. Exchange your stories. Show a little vulnerability. Show that you care, because people will want to be part of a community that cares. If that relationship is established, and you'll find that some work and some don't, have them over for dinner, for a Shabbat dinner. If it's Purim time, deliver Mishloach Manot and have another conversation. It's often by the third or fourth conversation only that you can get into any depth. But someone who's willing to connect with you 3 times is willing to connect with your community. It isn't actually that hard. But importantly, you have to bring the data back so that it can be managed. That way, you don't have 2 people calling the same person, and that way you can find out what different people find inspirational. And very interestingly, the congregations in North America that are doing it and doing it successful, and I've been in connection with one in Vancouver and one in Tahoe, have discovered that they often get very similar patterns of connection in different age groups. In other words, there isn't as big a generation gap as we think there might be. So great coffee dates are where synagogues begin to grow. This is the question that most disturbed me when I was actually on the planning group for Gen 08 and then was able to ask questions when Gen 17 recorded very similar results. Why is it important to live a Jewish life? My hypothesis is that most progressive Jews are living Jewish lives but don't actually know that what they're doing is Jewishly inspired. When you go out and feed the hungry, you're doing it because those are your Jewish values. And yet, what happened was 3 times as many Jews who identified as Orthodox as those who identified as Masorti or progressive considered being Jewish important in the way they live their lives when they answered the Gen 08 and Gen 17 questions. I would be overjoyed if by the time Gen 27 happens, there's virtually no difference in that statistic. The reality is, if people are socialised with coherent Jewish values, they will have a strong Jewish identity. If they're part of a community that cares, where relationships get built, where someone knows them by name, when someone gives them a call when they don't turn up to see if they're well, not only will they feel cared for, they will tell their friends that that is a community that cares. And in order to find those people, we need to find out what inspires the people we want to reach. And we need to speak confidently why our Judaism matters. It's the why we do what we do. And when we articulate the why, our communities will identify that being Jewish is important or very important to them. So there are components to doing it and doing it well. And these are the components. You combine the skills, the ability to have those deeper conversations. And it's amazing how easily already committed Jews, and that's everybody in this room, can learn and adapt those skills. Build the content. We can move to the why our Judaism matters and away from we're not Orthodox. And you will have stronger, growing communities. It is an achievable outcome. How do shul boards measure success? And here's what I've learnt from the overseas experience. Some congregational boards actually measure success by the number of relational meetings board members have each month and the way in which they're followed up. That second part is important. Those board members start the process of engaging in relational meetings and help adopt measures relating to impact, not levels of activity. I don't want to know how many meetings the rabbi had last month. I want to know what was learnt from those meetings that will help the synagogue grow. We need to include attitudinal measures so that we measure success by the way we've built a positive, confident attitude about our Judaism. Those congregations will grow and have grown because they prosper by not measuring attendance at a program, they prosper by building those relationships. This is not an easy change. It is so easy to make sure that the synagogue is open, it's clean, the chairs are in the right place, the rabbi's called up, all the aliyot are organised, and then you go home on Sunday and say, I'm done for the week. One of the reasons we are progressing Judaism 8 days a week is that we can't progress it 1 day a week. So it's not easy. But if we lay the foundation stones of progressive relational Judaism, we can have growing communities. A few examples of what has been learnt elsewhere. Strategies for peer-to-peer Jewish growth. Some communities discovered that they just wanted to get together with other people who are Jewish in their same profession or have a similar community interest outside of the synagogue. Strategies for implementing relational Judaism. Some people love to talk. You'd be amazed what happens when you get a few marketing guys together and they start talking about, well, hang on a minute, we should be talking to people outside the synagogue. Bingo, you're doing well. But before you do that, make sure you're in tune with the people who are already your members. Is the synagogue a place to make friends rather than just turn up to worship services? That question came back consistently when Vancouver implemented relational Judaism. Do we have peer friendship groups around common interests, such as parents of bar bat mitzvah students who don't just drop off their kid, but they all come together and they might have some bagels and coffee while their kids are learning? Do we provide education to families of preschoolers? One of the great money earners for synagogues who have funding problems is the kindy. That's great, but what about educating the families? Bring those families together. They have a common interest in the kindy. They have a common interest in their preschool education. And I can tell you that overwhelmingly, synagogues that do that treat the parents as having a simple role, that is drop off, pick up and pay fees. That doesn't work, folks. So if we build those relationships where we've already got points of opportunity, the prospects of success, you can see, aren't all that difficult to find. So the steps. Quick review, and then I'm very happy to have a degree of interaction until Susan says we're out of time.
Not yet. Keep going.
Number one, and the reason I show Simon Sinek. No, we're not Apple. We're progressive Judaism. But we too can articulate our why more effectively than just talk about what we do. Because everyone in this room could probably tell you why, but we want to empower you to do it more confidently. And that's why the UPJ is building the program talking about our Judaism. Then, articulate our Jewish values to our members. How many of our synagogues have members who actually don't quite know why they're members, who don't quite know why they're part of a progressive Jewish community? And in that large amorphous group, there will be some who are actually excited about talking with their friends if only they knew how. And then we can articulate our values to our potential members. But if you do it well, your members will do it for you. I've put the 3 circles there because if we use the relational Judaism skills to really, really listen, to find out those stories that are inspirational, to find those patterns of connection and manage them well, we can become Jewish communities of choice. I'll give one local example before I move on. In the year 2001, the Emmanuel School in Sydney was on its knees. It was almost bankrupt, enrolments were falling, there was a desperate need for change. We had a president who was a real Gough Whitlam-style crash or crash through kind of guy, and he brought out of retirement a recently retired principal from Cranbrook School who said, we're going to be disciplined, we're going to focus on the academics, we're going to do things well. But we still faced a fundamental problem in the community. We were seen as the bus stop school, the place where you enrol your kids till they could get into Mariah War Memorial College, the modern Orthodox school down the road. What did we decide to do? We had a small group and we went out and talked to our friends with kids of the same age group and said, these are the values, this is the sort of Jewish life your kids will experience if they come to Emmanuel School. And Rabbi Conyers in the room, her husband was a big part of that exercise. And slowly it began to change. We introduced gifted and talented commencing in Year K, not in Year 5 or 6. Hang on, a Jewish day school that wants to nurture the smartest kids? Wow, we're interested in that. Because parents told us that was something they were interested in when we really, really listened. What is the result today? The only Jewish day school in Sydney with wait lists is Emmanuel School. Kids enrol at Moriah until they can get into Emmanuel School. And that is what can be achieved by getting out there and really, really listening. So there's an opportunity. Imagine in a few years that you'll have strengthened those relationships with your members and potential members. Friendship groups will have formed. The offerings of synagogues and temples will have changed because you've listened to what people really want, what inspires them. There'll be more choices for engagement. I don't buy the line that small synagogues can't offer choice. Yes, you can. Imagine that there's a buzz in the Jewish community that your community is the place where Jewish people want to engage with others and create a community of meaning and purpose. Imagine congregations for whom it is now normal to share ideas with each other and learn from each other, with collaborative relationships forming among leaders of different congregations. Imagine our congregations being the communities of choice. I can imagine that. I hope you can. How much time do we have?
The next set of sessions starts in about 5 minutes, and people need to make their way to their chosen
So-
seats, but we still have.
I can't see because of the lighting, so I'm just going to assume there are some questions and yell. If the lighting can be adjusted, that would be helpful.
David, Danny Barrow.
Yep.
Thank you for an extraordinary presentation. I've got a comment to make, if I could, and then there's a question. As I sort of travel diversely all over Australia, I always see Jews impress in whatever they do. And I put to you that a lot of Jewish adult life is quite independent of congregations and houses of worship. I've said now for a couple of times to board members, we have extraordinary resource of people within the community, it is sure, and often we don't really, in inverted commas, know each other because we haven't had the opportunity, in your vernacular, to listen with each other. So my question of you is, why don't shuls allow groups of people within the shul to actually have small groups of meetings in their homes? Yes, I agree with you, it doesn't need to be institutions, where people actually get to understand other areas of influence and get to develop real exchange of backgrounds and understanding outside, notwithstanding their shul members, within the confines of their comfortable living spaces.
The short answer is yes, we can. What I have learned is that even the synagogues with the best data don't necessarily know what inspires, what are the experiences that matter to their members. I'll have a record, their name, address, number of children's, birthdays. I might even know whether they're an accountant or a medical practitioner. But that's what our records tell us. It is only by building these conversations that we can identify the groups that might have something in common, and then those small friendship groups can begin to germinate. Rabbi.
Yes. Can you help me differentiate between Jewish progressive values and general universal progressive values? The reason I ask that question is because when I talk with folks about their values and that perhaps what they're doing is already Jewish, they might say back to me, well, yes, but it's also my general progressive values. Why do I need to join a shul to be living out what I'm already living out with all of my other friends?
Baruch Hashem, I say you don't. But what else?
Wait, so then why Judaism?
But then I ask a different question.
Okay.
Tell me about something you found so inspirational that drives what you do. And 9 times out of 10, you get something from their childhood or school years that had a Jewish connection that drives them. And about half the time, as the person is speaking, they realise that they want a human connection that has commonality around Jewish values. I don't even have to say it. So by having that sort of inviting conversation, and you listen carefully to what people say, very often you'll find with a Jewish person, it's a Jewish experience that's driving what they do, and they realise that they would like more of the same.